All good things must come to an end, and unfortunately, I believe Star Wars is in the final stage of its long decline. But first, let's start at the beginning.
Star Wars, rated PG. Starts tomorrow at a theater near you.
Chapter 1. The Originals. The year is 1977. Jimmy Carter was sworn in as the 39th American president. Elvis Presley was entering the last year of his life, and on May the 25th, a small indie film on a budget of $11 million was released. The film was called Star Wars, retrospectively renamed Star Wars Episode 4: A New Hope. George Lucas's creation shook the very core of cinematic and entertainment history, so much so that over the following 50 years, Star Wars remains the second biggest movie franchise of all time, and its cultural significance cannot be overstated. Star Wars introduced us to a young orphan Luke Skywalker, the Force, the Jedi, the Sith, lightsabers, the Death Star, the Millennium Falcon, and Darth Vader. Star Wars caught the imagination of millions like no movie before it. The rusted, battered Falcon, Imperial Star Destroyers, and Death Star pushed the boundaries of visual filmmaking, and the concept of the Force established an incredible mythos. Episode 4, A New Hope, took America, the UK, and the world by storm. 3 years later, on May the 21st, 1980, Star Wars Episode 5, The Empire Strikes Back, was released. The rebels are on a run from Darth Vader and the ominous Emperor. This time, George Lucas relinquished his director seat and hired Irvin Kershner as director and Lawrence Kasdan to help him with the screenplay. Reflective of Lucas's distaste for major film studios, he again worked outside the conventional Hollywood structure and financed the film using profits from A New Hope and a bank loan. The additional characters of Yoda, Lando, and Boba Fett added to the diverse universe Lucas had established in A New Hope. The backstory and world building, with Force Ghost Obi-Wan, the Bounty Hunters, the mysterious Emperor, Hoth, Dagobah, and Cloud City, made the Star Wars galaxy feel all the more inspiring and lived in, and of course, one of the greatest reveals in cinematic history.
No, I am your father.
Empire Strikes Back was one of the rare occasions where the sequel transcended the original. It certified Star Wars' place as an era-defining franchise. From humble beginnings, Lucas had created a universe that remained front and centre in mainstream culture, and was loved by adults, teenagers, and children by the millions.
A cowboy movie set in space. That's Star Wars.
After another 3-year gap, the long-awaited conclusion to the original trilogy was released. On May the 25th, 1983, Return of the Jedi started off in Jabba's palace, with Jedi Luke, Leia, Lando, C-3PO, and R2-D2 rescuing Han Solo and destroying Jabba's barge ship in the process. The movie ended with Darth Vader saving his son from his master Emperor Palpatine. Ewoks, Rebels, Luke, Leia, Han, and the rest of the galaxy celebrated as the Empire's tyranny was finally ended. Fans and critics across the world agreed that Return of the Jedi was a solid and satisfying conclusion to the trilogy that had dominated the box office over the last 7 years. Beyond any doubt, the original trilogy was a visual, financial, and critical success, with Lucasfilm making millions from subsequent action figure sales, conventions, comic books, and video games. There was tepid criticism aimed at the original trilogy for the poor dialogue, especially in A New Hope, where George Lucas was the sole screenwriter and director, terrible stormtrooper aim, and Ewoks being a blatant cash grab for toy sales. These criticisms would be found in a final paragraph of a glowing review for the originals, and was just a small side point in the overwhelmingly positive reviews that the original trilogy had. Chapter 2. The Prequels. Just over 15 years later, in 1999, Episode 1, The Phantom Menace, the first in George Lucas's prequel trilogy, hit theatres. Taking place just over 30 years before the events of A New Hope, Phantom Menace would introduce young Anakin Skywalker, Padawan Obi-Wan, his master Qui-Gon Jinn, Senator Palpatine, and his apprentice, Darth Maul. Episode 2, Attack of the Clones, and Episode 3, Revenge of the Sith, were released 3 years apart from each other, in 2002 and 2005 respectively. Criticism for the prequels was certainly more severe than for the originals, with fans and critics making videos and writing articles online slamming dialogue,
I don't like sand,
Jar Jar Binks, and the overall boring political plot. The box office reflected this, with Attack of the Clones making less than A Phantom Menace. There was an increase in the box office for Revenge of the Sith, but it still brought in less than the first of the prequel films, The Phantom Menace. The critical scores of IMDb and Rotten Tomatoes to this day show the critics and audience disappointment towards the prequel films, scoring 51%, 65% and 79% for the critical scores, and 59, 56 and 66 for the audience score. Many questioned whether Lucas had himself destroyed Star Wars. Chapter 3: The Quiet Years. After the poor response from fans for the prequels settled down, in quiet corners of the internet there were murmurings that some liked and even loved the prequels. With its incredible world building, cutting edge visual effects, amazing space battles, and dynamic lightsaber fights. Nothing did more to grow this underground affection for the prequels than the Clone Wars TV show. In 2008, many of the voice actors returned from the Tarkovsky Star Wars film to voice characters in Star Wars: The Clone Wars, an animated film set between Attack of the Clones and Revenge of the Sith. Although receiving scathing reviews and not the best box office results, George Lucas and Dave Filoni brought the characters, art style and storyline from the maligned animated film to the TV show of the same name, Star Wars: The Clone Wars. Primarily aimed at children, the TV show expanded on characters such as Anakin, Obi-Wan and the clones. For many, the Clone Wars made up for the flaws in the prequels and added character depth, development and understanding to episodes 1, 2 and 3. Star Wars toy sales continued to boom with the new Clone Wars figures, and the comics and novels set in the expanded universe showed that Star Wars was teeming with life. In addition to this, much loved Star Wars games were also being released, games such as Star Wars Battlefront 2, Republic Commando, LEGO Star Wars and Star Wars The Old Republic. The franchise was enjoying an exciting time, albeit away from the big screen. Chapter 4: The Takeover. On October 30th, 2012, George Lucas sold Lucasfilm to Disney for $4 billion, with half in cash and half in Disney stock. Whether it be because of the backlash from critics and fans for his prequels, his age, or the fact that his wife Melanie Hobson was about to give birth to their daughter, George gave control of his company and all future Star Wars projects to Disney. 5 months prior to the sale, George Lucas installed Kathleen Kennedy as co-chair of Lucasfilm, and once taken over by Disney, Kennedy became the president of the company. Fans had mixed feelings with the Disney takeover, with many believing that George had somewhat tarnished his legacy with the prequels, and that Disney certainly had the resources and capital to create new Star Wars movies. Others saw this as the end of Star Wars as they knew it. Lucasfilm would no longer be under the leadership of its sole creator, and fans worried that Disney would standardise and corporatize the once revolutionary franchise. That success was somewhat down to it being outside the Hollywood studio machine. The Hollywood studio machine that Star Wars was now owned by. In March 2013, Disney Lucasfilm announced that the TV series Star Wars: The Clone Wars would be ending in its current season, Season 6. Only 13 episodes were aired of Season 6, compared to the 20+ episode season that preceded it. Whether it be because The Clone Wars was getting too mature for the Disney brand, or whether Disney weren't too keen on producing a show that was being aired on the rival TV channel Cartoon Network. Or perhaps they wanted to focus on a new direction for Star Wars, and The Clone Wars just didn't fit that path. In 2014, Disney made another unpopular but perhaps understandable move, by cancelling the expanded universe, making it no longer part of Star Wars canon, meaning thousands of novels, comics, shows and games were now labelled as legends. Disney were now no longer tied down to over 30 years of lore that the expanded universe had established, but this move and the Clone Wars TV show's abrupt ending sowed the seeds of fan dissatisfaction with how Disney were running Lucasfilm. Chapter 5: The Return of Star Wars. On November the 28th, 2014, the first Disney Star Wars movie teaser was released for the upcoming film Episode VII The Force Awakens. The teaser and subsequent full trailer showed glimpses of a new generation of Star Wars characters. A Darth Vader Sith lookalike, Kylo Ren, with his crossguard red lightsaber, a desert-dwelling scavenger called Rey, and a stormtrooper defector, who in the trailers wields a blue lightsaber. The excitement and anticipation for a new Star Wars film was palpable. 10 years since Revenge of the Sith hit theatres, Star Wars The Force Awakens was released on the 17th of December 2015. The Force Awakens became the most profitable film of the franchise's history, boasting a worldwide box office of $2 billion, and still to this day, the biggest opening weekend in the US, bringing in almost $250 million in its first weekend alone. The Force Awakens had the signature J.J. Abrams zip and action, with emotional moments for Han Solo, Leia and Chewie, and a promising debut for the new cast, Daisy Ridley, John Boyega, Oscar Isaac, and Adam Driver. Critically, The Force Awakens did incredibly well, scoring 93% on Rotten Tomatoes and an 85% audience score. There was the occasional comment that J.J. Abrams had effectively copy and pasted A New Hope, replacing the Death Star with Starkiller Base, Rey replacing Luke as a desert planet orphan learning the Force, the wise experienced Obi-Wan as Luke's mentor, replaced by Han Solo as Rey's mentor, but like Obi-Wan dies at the end of the film, and a rescue mission aboard Starkiller Base, like the rescue mission for Leia on the Death Star. Abrams' mystery box approach opened up many questions, such as who were Rey's parents? Who were Finn's parents? Why is Luke only in a film for 22 seconds? What happened to the Rebellion's New Republic? How did the First Order rise from the ashes of the Empire? And who was Snoke? These questions that The Force Awakens posed initially seemed like a masterstroke, as theories surrounding these questions kept Star Wars fans busy, analysing every musical number that played when a certain character was on screen, their lightsaber style, and the words each of the new characters spoke. At the time, it was fair to say that The Force Awakens was an absolute success on every front for Disney Star Wars. Less than a year later from The Force Awakens, on December 16, 2016, Rogue One, A Star Wars Story was released. Set just before the events of A New Hope, Rogue One follows an eclectic mix of rebels as they steal their Death Star plans. Rogue One was the first live-action Star Wars film to not focus on the Skywalker family, and its choice received praise by critics. A beautiful film with a more gritty, nuanced look at the rebellion and the inner mechanisms of the rebels and Empire. It wasn't a perfect film though, with many commenting on the excessive fan service moments and boring, underdeveloped characters. Star Wars fans will be able to name many of the main characters, but asking your average moviegoer, can you name 3 characters from Rogue One, and they would probably struggle. Rogue One can certainly be considered a success, but perhaps not an overwhelming one, with the first sign of problems to come for Disney Star Wars. These problems being oversaturation, creative differences by firing of directors partway through production, and a reliance on nostalgia. The first 2 years of Disney Star Wars films would turn out to be the best 2 years Disney Star Wars would have. Chapter 5: The Attack of the Fans. Continuing the Disney Star Wars scheduling, Episode 8, The Last Jedi, would be released just before Christmas on December 15th, 2017. The Last Jedi was written and directed by Rian Johnson, a relatively unexperienced director who prior to The Last Jedi directed the Bruce Willis time-travelling movie Looper, and a few episodes of the acclaimed TV show Breaking Bad. The Last Jedi trailers built on a setup from The Force Awakens, and early critical reviews were phenomenal. Leading up to its worldwide release, there was speculation that The Last Jedi could even rival Empire Strikes Back. The president of Lucasfilm, Kathleen Kennedy, seemingly shared this enthusiasm for Rian Johnson's film and announced that Johnson would be helming a Star Wars trilogy in the future. Finally, the day arrived. December 15th, 2017. The Last Jedi was released. Failing to meet the lofty numbers of Episode 7, The Last Jedi was the first out of the 3 Star Wars trilogies to make less than its predecessor in its opening weekend. Nonetheless, many loved the film, praising the twists and unexpected decisions of killing off Snoke, making Rey a nobody, and Luke's choice to leave his friends and family and wish for the Jedi Order to die, and then Luke's subsequent death. Many were also blown away by the visuals of the planet Crate, the hyperspace Holdo maneuver, and Snoke's throne room fight, with Rey, Kylo, and the Praetorian Guards. It would be fair to say that for every one positive film review for The Last Jedi, there were at least 5 mildly disappointed to absolutely furious fan videos and reviews. The Rotten Tomatoes critic rating of 91% compared to the audience score of 42% epitomises this clear disparity between fans and critics for the film. The headline-grabbing stories were that fan groups were clubbing together to raise funds to remake The Last Jedi, Rian Johnson calling fans man-babies and doing his best to stir the controversy pot, Mark Hamill making numerous comments about how he fundamentally disagreed with what Johnson did to the Luke Skywalker character.
I told Ryan, I fundamentally disagree with virtually everything you've decided about my character.
And thousands upon thousands of fan videos explaining what they didn't like about The Last Jedi, competing against the mainstream publications, defending The Last Jedi, calling it a masterpiece. Obviously, the truth is somewhere more in the middle. And let's not forget that in the early 2000s, Star Wars fans fairly unanimously hated the prequels, and have had a love-hate relationship with Star Wars for a very long time. Perhaps the controversy with The Last Jedi was a culmination of the many issues fans had with Disney's short time in charge of Lucasfilm. Or perhaps it was just because Johnson's movie showed little respect to the Star Wars franchise as a whole, and in turn, the fans let their feelings be known. The box office results support the latter, with a global box office of $1.3 billion, an amazing number for sure, but a 35% drop compared to The Force Awakens. The Last Jedi also holds the unwelcome title of having the second worst second-week decline for a Star Wars film, suggesting that the hardcore fans who rewatched The Force Awakens numerous times in its first few weeks did not do the same for The Last Jedi. The Last Jedi created a chasm between Lucasfilm and the fans, which over 5 years on is still no closer to being repaired. It's also created a divide in the Star Wars fanbase, where any criticism of The Last Jedi makes one a toxic man-baby, or any praise for The Last Jedi is seen as woke, fake, and cringy. 6 months after The Last Jedi, and Star Wars still very much being the most controversial topic on the internet, another Star Wars film was released, Solo, A Star Wars Story. The second, and possibly last standalone film set before A New Hope. Solo followed the journey of a young Han Solo, played by Alden Ehrenreich, as he learns the ropes of becoming a smuggler and goes on a swashbuckling adventure with Chewie, Lando, and others. Now Solo flopped at the box office, with under $400 million in ticket sales, and ultimately making a loss. After Lord and Miller were fired as directors for Solo a long way into production, Ron Howard reportedly reshot over 60% of the film. The behind-the-scenes issues, an online skirmish between fans and Lucasfilm, surely played a role in the poor financial results of Solo, with fans boycotting the movie in protest to The Last Jedi. How many people actually didn't go because of this is hard to quantify, and probably didn't make a huge impact on worldwide ticket sales. This boycott, however, was part of a larger narrative and lack of enthusiasm for Star Wars post The Last Jedi. That narrative certainly affected Solo's box office. Despite this, considering how patched together the film was, and perhaps as unnecessary as it was, Solo plays out surprisingly smoothly. Lucasfilm reportedly hired an acting coach for Ehrenreich, but his performance was praised as being snappy and fun, as was Donald Glover's portrayal of Lando. But most of the reviews were indifferent, showing a lack of interest or passion either way, negative or positive, for the film. Many said that Solo was a movie that had no reason to exist, a low-stakes, joyless slog, and a pointless exploration into Easter egg detail that not even the biggest Star Wars fan cared about. It's fair to say that for Lucasfilm and Star Wars fans, 2017 and 2018 were years to forget. Chapter 7: The Revenge of the Fans. In December 2019, the sequel trilogy came to a close, with Episode 9 The Rise of Skywalker. With the trailer revealing that somehow Palpatine returned, even the most disaffected fan wanted to know how the Skywalker saga would end. With enough storylines to fill an entire trilogy, Rise of Skywalker brought back Palpatine, then killed him, revealed Rey to be a Palpatine clone, then an adopted Skywalker, had Kylo Ren redeemed as Ben Solo, then he dies, then he comes back to life again, and then dies again. Has Chewie die, but not really, as that was a fake out. Has Leia die, in a somewhat odd but respectful way for Carrie Fisher, who had passed away years earlier. Had Han Solo return as a memory, and Luke return as a Force ghost, as well as trying to undo what was done in The Last Jedi as often as possible. It is fair to say that Rise of Skywalker was not the best conclusion to the once universally loved galaxy far, far away. Scoring 52% on Rotten Tomatoes, the critics who faithfully defended The Last Jedi from fan backlash were nowhere to be seen in their defence of Rise of Skywalker. As the old saying goes, try to please everyone and you end up pleasing no one. And between sequel haters and sequel fans, there is perhaps rare agreement that The Rise of Skywalker was not the ending that the genre-defining Star Wars deserved. One could conclude that the Skywalker saga ended not with a bang, but with a whimper. The box office results for Rise of Skywalker were reflective of the decline Star Wars was facing, with Rise of Skywalker bringing in $1 billion, $300 million less than its predecessor, The Last Jedi, and around half of The Force Awakens, making it a perfect example of a franchise suffering from diminishing returns, living off fumes of past glories. The fading interest in Star Wars during the sequel trilogy era can also be seen outside of the big screen if we look at the Star Wars merchandise. From Kenner and vintage collection figures like Yak Face and Boba Fett to Baby Yoda pillows. Merchandise has always been a massive part of the Star Wars franchise. During periods when there weren't any Star Wars films, between the originals and prequels and sequels, Star Wars figures could be found in every supermarket and every toy shop. Star Wars toys, especially the 3.75-inch figure lines, have been an important barometer when viewing the success of Star Wars remaining in the public consciousness. Since the release of A New Hope in 1977, Star Wars figures have made Lucasfilm millions of dollars every year, almost creating a sub-industry by itself, with fans buying Star Wars figures and reselling them for a massive profit, as the figures' demand increases exponentially over time. However, this huge aspect of Star Wars has also suffered during the Disney Star Wars era. With very few exceptions, Star Wars sequel figures such as Rose Tico, General Hux and Admiral Holdo clogged up shelf space and can now be bought for less than their original retail price. Whilst the original trilogy, the prequel trilogy, the Clone Wars TV show and the Expanded Universe figures sell for at least triple their retail price. From the sequel movies to sequel merchandise, Star Wars just isn't what it used to be. Chapter 8: A New Hope. On November the 12th, 2019, a show set between The Return of the Jedi and The Force Awakens aired. Created by Jon Favreau, the show was called The Mandalorian, and featured a Boba Fett-like, stoic bounty hunter and his young adopted son, Grogu, more commonly referred to as Baby Yoda. The series breathed new life into the flailing franchise, and was loved by old-school Star Wars fans, new fans, and non-Star Wars fans who just loved Baby Yoda. Following on from a fantastic debut season, Season 2 of The Mandalorian aired less than a year after, in late 2020. Grogu, Mando, Greef Karga, Cara Dune and Moff Gideon were joined by Bo-Katan, Ahsoka, and in the finale, Luke Skywalker. In a moment that sparked joy and emotion, Luke Skywalker returned in a way that many thought he should have in the sequel trilogy. The Mandalorian brought fans together. In another popular but slightly embarrassing move, Disney announced that the Clone Wars TV show was saved. The show that they cancelled 6 years ago was going to be concluded in a final season of 12 episodes. Fans who had campaigned relentlessly for years using the hashtag #SaveTheCloneWars were rewarded for showing their love and support for the animated show. Although not having the best middle section, the end of Season 7 of the Clone Wars, with a 3-part Mandalorian arc and Rex and Ahsoka's escape from Order 66, would go down as one of the best stories in Star Wars history. This return to original and prequel era Star Wars seems almost like Disney Lucasfilm were realising that this is where the majority of the fanbase wants to be, at arm's length from the sequels. Chapter 9. Apathy. During an extended break between Mando Season 2 and Season 3, Disney released numerous shows on their new streaming site, Disney+. Shows such as The Bad Batch, set between episode 3 and 4 with the same animation style as the Clone Wars, featuring characters from the much-loved show such as Captain Rex, Echo and Cad Bane, as well as Clone Force 99. Bad Batch served as a good, but not perfect follow-on from the Clone Wars, and it is praised for its stunning visuals, interesting characters and outstanding music from Kevin Kiner. But it's fair to say that The Bad Batch is not watched by many non-hardcore Star Wars fans. The Book of Boba Fett was also released in 2021, but unfortunately many saw this as Disney once again dropping the ball. Whether it be the Mos Eisley biker gang, or the fact that Boba had his helmet off for most of his screen time, or that Mando and Grogu took over 2 episodes and overshone Boba Fett in his own show, The Book of Boba Fett felt a bit like Star Wars was an autopilot. A year after The Book of Boba Fett, the Obi-Wan Kenobi limited series was released on Disney+, with Disney realising that the children and young adults who loved the prequels had now grown up and had money to spend. Disney Star Wars capitalised on this, utilising one of the best parts of the prequels, which was Ewan McGregor as Obi-Wan Kenobi. Unfortunately, the show was both simultaneously brilliant and terrible, with moments of shocking visuals and poor writing, such as young Leia hiding under Obi-Wan's coat and a stormtrooper attack where they missed point blank against Obi-Wan's rebels, whilst also having moments of beauty and pathos, with Darth Vader and Obi-Wan's fight, and Obi-Wan revealing to young Leia that he had a brother, and the emotional moment of Leia asking whether Obi-Wan was her real father. Many were disappointed that the Sith Inquisitor, Reva, was taking a more prominent role than Darth Vader, and the fact that Reva was stabbed twice by a lightsaber, but still somehow survived. Somehow, Disney managed to turn the open goal that was a Kenobi show into a bit of a letdown. Disney Star Wars was now fully focusing on churning out Star Wars content on Disney+, and 2 months after the Kenobi finale, Andor, a 12-episode season set again between episode 3 and 4, was released. Andor was a show that no one asked for, but turned out to be a masterfully written, gritty and character-driven show that may in fact be the best that Disney Star Wars has created. Sadly, not many watched it, possibly because it focused on a character who was introduced and killed off in the spin-off film Rogue One, or perhaps Andor was affected by the disappointment of Kenobi, the same way Solo was affected because of The Last Jedi's controversy. The change of directors midway through film production, as well as the ever-constant rumours of behind-the-scenes drama, with the current rumour being that there's an issue between Jon Favreau and Kathleen Kennedy, and the Mandalorian lead actor Pedro Pascal. We've had the cancellation of Rogue Squadrons, the Old Republic trilogy, Bryan Johnson trilogy, the Rangers of the New Republic, and Lando. And on top of this, Mando Season 3 is receiving more criticism than the previous 2 seasons, meaning that even the bright light of The Mandalorian is being darkened. All of these issues lead me to conclude that despite being a Star Wars fan all my life, the excitement is almost gone. After being let down year after year due to complete mishandling of the franchise, poor planning, and quality being substituted for quantity, Star Wars is just not what it used to be. What once was fun escapism is now just corporised product, which has lost its magic and is just a bit tiring. Like me, I think many are not quite ready to leave the galaxy far, far away for good, but the growing weariness of Star Wars is now well and truly set in. As always, I want to hear your views, so if you agree or disagree, please let me know in the comments below. We are doing video essays like this every month, as well as movie and show reviews every week. So if you like this video, please consider liking and subscribing to the channel. Thank you, and see you again.